ensure healthier outcomes for our families and neighbors, and the examples I've just shared with you are only a few of what's happening all across the country. We're smarter, Madam Chair. Prevention works. It saves taxpayers money, it saves families money, and it saves lives. I reserve the balance of my time.
Balance of our time. Does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise in opposition to the amendment?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I stand in opposition to the Castor amendment. The amendment before us directs the GAO to pontificate on the effectiveness of unspecified prevention, wellness, and public health activities financed by funds under Section 4002 of PPACA. As we have pointed out, Section 4002 gives the Secretary of HHS complete discretion to spend the slush fund with little limitation. Any program within the Public Health Service Act, regardless of its merit or effectiveness, is eligible for funding under Section 4002. How can we ask the GAO to determine the effectiveness of spending dollars when we simply don't know how those dollars will be spent? Is GAO supposed to assume that funds will be used to train doctors or build jungle gyms? Will their report make the assumption that the money will be used to advocate for soda tax increases in states or build signs that direct people to bike paths? All of these activities can be funded through this slush fund. According to the Energy and Commerce Minority Views, Pitt County, North Carolina received a grant from the fund that will be in part used to, quote, place signage within communities to point out public parks, other recreational opportunities, and the availability of bike lanes, end quote. This amendment underscores the major problem with Section 4002. Rather than letting Congress weigh the relative value of programs through the annual appropriations process, my friends on the other side of the aisle decided to throw dollars to a political appointee at HHS to spend billions of dollars on any program with no oversight. The amendment also places an unrealistic timetable on the GAO to issue a report within 90 days of enactment. It is simply a waste of money to ask GAO to conduct a study with little time to complete what is clearly an impossible task. I urge my colleagues to vote no and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentlewoman from Florida.
Madam Chair, how much more time do I have?
The gentlewoman has 1 minute remaining, and the gentleman from Pennsylvania has 2.5 minutes remaining.
And who has the right to close?
The gentleman from Pennsylvania has the right to close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, what would be a waste of money would be if we did not act on education and knowledge, because we know that prevention works in America. When you educate someone on healthier lifestyles, the likelihood is that they are going to live a healthier life. They could prevent disease. Maybe they get early detection of their cancer, and that would save them a lot of money. You know, it also would save the government a lot of money. So let's be smart about this. Prevention works. It reminds me now of my friends across the aisle, their proposal to end Medicare as we know it, because that is not smart. Again, like prevention, Medicare works. It saves families money, and the plan to privatize Medicare and turn it into a voucher program it's not going to save any money. Indeed, it will shift the cost to families. They will have to pay more. So let's do what's smart. Prevention works. I urge adoption of my amendment.
Gentlewoman yields back. Balance of her time. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Madam Chair, the simple fact is everything the gentlelady just mentioned, she doesn't know will be funded. There is no guarantee to fund any of those things. I urge a no vote on this amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
All time for debate has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is gentlewoman from Florida.
I ask for the yeas and nays.
Gentlewoman asked for a recorded vote.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Florida will be postponed. It's now in order to consider Amendment Number 3, printed in House Report 1-1261. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida rise?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in House Report number 112-61, offered by Ms. Castor of Florida.
Pursuant to House Resolution 219, the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Castor, and a member opposed to each will control 5 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My amendment requires a Government Accountability Office study within 90 days of enactment of this bill to examine the economic impact prevention and public health grants have on states and local communities. Now, I can tell you we don't really need a study to understand how important prevention is and how important it is to empower our hometowns, our local governments, nonprofits, whoever can come together on a local level and make these decisions about encouraging healthier lifestyles. The beauty of the Public Health and Prevention Initiative is it's not Washington dictating all across the country a cookie-cutter approach, one size fits all. Instead, we empower our neighbors to make these decisions on what works best for them. I would say that what works best in my hometown back in Tampa probably would not work quite as well as Fargo or in Missouri. Prevention of disease is smart. It saves families money and it saves taxpayers money as well. Now, over time, we have all gotten smarter about preventing chronic diseases. Much of this cost-saving and life-saving focus was brought to bear in the landmark Affordable Care Act and this Prevention and Public Health Initiative, which is the most historic investment in public health of our communities in the history of our country. Now, far from the extreme arguments against prevention from my colleagues across the aisle, the Prevention and Public Health Initiative empowers states, hometowns, and local communities to determine what works best for them. The annual treatment cost of chronic diseases costs the United States over $270 billion. And our economy has lost over $1 trillion in lost productivity. In Florida alone, we've lost over $68 billion in lost productivity and economic costs due to chronic diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. So not only does prevention help us reduce costs, it can be an economic boost to our communities. I can tell you back in Florida, we need as many economic boosts as we can get. We still have a high unemployment rate. We have a large number of uninsured. So what could be smarter than targeting some of our communities and encouraging them on healthier lifestyles so they can get back to work? We're creating jobs through doing this. For example, at the University of South Florida College of Public Health, they've received one of the Prevention and Public Health grants that, where they're hiring and training the modern public health workforce. These are the folks with the most updated knowledge that are able to go out through communities and encourage them and educate them on what it would mean if they didn't smoke, if they didn't drink. Oftentimes, these initiatives have a great impact. They can save us money and they can save us lives. In Pinellas County, they're combating childhood obesity, and they're already making a big economic impact in the community. Richard Curtin is the program manager for the Communities Putting Prevention to Work Pinellas. He informed me that they've created already 18 jobs as a direct result of this life-saving work. So I would encourage all of you to ask your folks back home what works best for them. Apply for these grants. We can make a difference all across America, save taxpayers money, save our families money, and save lives while we're at it. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time. Does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise in opposition to the amendment?
Yes.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, I stand in opposition to the amendment. The Castor Amendment directs the Government Accountability Office to make assumptions on the economic impacts of providing prevention, wellness, and public health activities under Section 4002 of PPACA. However, Section 4002 gives the Secretary of HHS complete discretion to spend this slush fund with little limitation. The amendment asks the GAO to determine the economic impact of spending, when no one except the Secretary knows how those dollars will be spent. What will GAO base their assumptions on? Does placing signage for bike paths produce economic activity? Or does advocating higher soda taxes benefit the economy? These activities have been financed by programs eligible for funding under Section 4002. Members and the GAO cannot determine the economic impact of the fund because the Secretary controls how it is to be spent. Will GAO be charged with determining whether borrowing 42 cents of every dollar this fund spends has a positive economic impact? This amendment underscores the major problems with Section 4002. Rather than letting Congress weigh the relative value of programs through the annual appropriations process, my friends on the other side of the aisle have decided to throw dollars to a political appointee at HHS to spend billions on any program with no oversight. The amendment also places an unrealistic timetable on the GAO to issue a report within 90 days of enactment. Like the previous amendment, we are not spending our resources wisely when we ask the GAO to conduct a study with little time to complete what is clearly an impossible task. I urge members to oppose the amendment and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentlewoman from Florida.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, we are spending our dollars wisely when we're investing in prevention and wellness because prevention works. Prevention saves money, it saves the taxpayers' money, it saves families' money, and it saves lives. Now, there's been a great debate all across America about health care over the past few years. I think we can all agree on that. Part of the importance of the health care debate was that our health care system for too long has focused and spent money at the end game on sickness. When people have cancer, and that's fine. But we can be smarter about it. We have a lot more knowledge and a lot of experts that have advised us all that if you invest in prevention to encourage folks not to smoke, not to drink, those easy things, very easy in lifestyle, but oftentimes they need a little extra help. Parents should turn off the TV and the kids should go out and play. They should exercise. But sometimes it's that little extra push. And if we can make a dent in childhood obesity, diabetes, cancer, a stroke, because we've encouraged healthier lifestyles with this very modest investment, that will be a great accomplishment. And that's part of what the health care debate was about. Taking this modest investment in public health and empowering our communities to make those decisions on what works for them. Prevention works. It's smart. I urge the adoption of my amendment.
Does the gentlewoman yield back?
I yield back my time.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Madam Chair, again, the gentlelady has made my point. She has no guarantee that in the year 2015 the Secretary will fund programs like cessation of smoking or obesity. She has not a clue. What if the Secretary decided to use the whole $2 billion for abstinence education in 2015? She has no clue what it will be used for. I urge the members to oppose this amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. All time for debate on the amendment has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the noes have it. The amendment is gentlewoman from Florida.
Madam Chair, I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Florida will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in House Report 11261, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order: Amendment number 2 by Ms. Castor of Florida and Amendment number 3 by Ms. Castor of Florida. The Chair will reduce to 5 minutes the time for any electronic vote after the first vote in this series. Unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment 2, printed in House Report 11261 by the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Castor, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in House Report number 112-61, offered by Ms. Castor of Florida.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
The House this afternoon has been considering a bill that would repeal the multi-billion-dollar Prevention and Public Health Fund that was part of last year's health care law. They've been debating several amendments, and two of those amendments will get recorded votes. They're both by Kathy Castor of Florida, and on this first amendment would require the Government Accountability Office to conduct a study of the impact of funds awarded through the Prevention and Public Health Fund and what the effect they would have on preventing chronic diseases and promoting health. So two votes here, two amendment votes, and then motion to recommit and final passage still to come. This first vote is 15 minutes, and during this first vote we're going to bring you a portion of President Obama's speech today on his deficit reduction plan, proposing a way to lower the nation's future deficits by $4 trillion over 12 years. Here's part of what the President had to say today.
So here's the truth. Around two-thirds of our budget, two-thirds, is spent on Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and national security. Two-thirds. Programs like unemployment insurance, student loans, veterans benefits, and tax credits for working families take up another 20%. What's left after interest on the debt is just 12% for everything else. That's 12% for all of our national priorities: education, clean energy, medical research, transportation, our national parks, food safety, keeping our air and water clean, you name it. All of that accounts for 12% of our budget. Now, up till now, the debate here in Washington, the cuts proposed by a lot of folks in Washington, have focused exclusively on that 12%. But cuts to that 12% alone won't solve the problem. So any serious plan to tackle our deficit will require us to put everything on the table and take on excess spending wherever it exists in the budget. A serious plan doesn't require us to balance our budget overnight. In fact, economists think that with the economy just starting to grow again, we need a phased-in approach. But it does require tough decisions and support from our leaders in both parties now. Above all, it will require us to choose a vision of the America we want to see 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. Now, to their credit, one vision has been presented and championed by Republicans in the House of Representatives and embraced by several of their party's presidential candidates. It's a plan that aims to reduce our deficit by $4 trillion over the next 10 years, and one that addresses the challenge of Medicare and Medicaid in the years after that. These are both worthy goals. They're worthy goals for us to achieve. But the way this plan achieves those goals would lead to a fundamentally different America than the one we've known, certainly in my lifetime. In fact, I think it would be fundamentally different than what we've known throughout our history. A 70% cut in clean energy, a 25% cut in education, a 30% cut in transportation, cuts in college Pell Grants that will grow to more than $1,000 per year. That's the proposal. These aren't the kinds of cuts you make when you're trying to get rid of some waste or find extra savings in the budget. These aren't the kinds of cuts that the Fiscal Commission proposed. These are the kinds of cuts that tell us we can't afford the America that I believe in and I think you believe in. I believe it paints a vision of our future that is deeply pessimistic. It's a vision that says if our roads crumble and our bridges collapse, we can't afford to fix them. If there are bright young Americans who have the drive and the will but not the money to go to college, we can't afford to send them. Go to China and you'll see businesses opening research labs and solar facilities. South Korean children are outpacing our kids in math and science. They're scrambling to figure out how they put more money into education. Brazil is investing billions in new infrastructure and can run half their cars not on high-priced gasoline but on biofuels. And yet, we are presented with a vision that says the American people, the United States of America, the greatest nation on earth, can't afford any of this. It's a vision that says America can't afford to keep the promise we've made to care for our seniors. It says that 10 years from now, if you're a 65-year-old who's eligible for Medicare, you should have to pay nearly $6,400 more than you would today. It says instead of guaranteed health care, you will get a voucher. And if that voucher isn't worth enough to buy the insurance that's available in the open marketplace, well, tough luck. You're on your own. Put simply, it ends Medicare as we know it. It's a vision that says up to 50 million Americans have to lose their health insurance in order for us to reduce the deficit. Who are these 50 million Americans? Many are somebody's grandparents, maybe one of yours, who wouldn't be able to afford nursing home care without Medicaid. Many are poor children. Some are middle-class families who have children with autism or Down syndrome. Some of these kids with disabilities are, the disabilities are so severe that they require 24-hour care. These are the Americans we'd be telling to fend for themselves. And worst of all, this is a vision that says even though Americans can't afford to invest in education at current levels or clean energy, even though we can't afford to maintain our commitment on Medicare and Medicaid, we can somehow afford more than $1 trillion in new tax breaks for the wealthy. Think about that. In the last decade, the average income of the bottom 90% of all working Americans actually declined. Meanwhile, the top 1% saw their income rise by an average of more than $250,000 each. That's who needs to pay less taxes? They want to give people like me a $200,000 tax cut that's paid for by asking 33 seniors each to pay $6,000 more in health costs. That's not right. And it's not going to happen as long as I'm president. This vision is less about reducing the deficit than it is about changing the basic social compact in America. Ronald Reagan's own budget director said there's nothing serious or courageous about this plan. There's nothing serious about a plan that claims to reduce the deficit by spending $1 trillion on tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. And I don't think there's anything courageous about asking for sacrifice from those who can least afford it and don't have any clout on Capitol Hill. That's not a vision of the America I know. The America I know is generous and compassionate. It's a land of opportunity and optimism. Yes, we take responsibility for ourselves, but we also take responsibility for each other, for the country we want and the future that we share. We're a nation that built a railroad across a continent and brought light to communities shrouded in darkness. We sent a generation to college on the GI Bill, and we saved millions of seniors from poverty with Social Security and Medicare. We have led the world in scientific research and technological breakthroughs that have transformed millions of lives. That's who we are. This is the America that I know. We don't have to choose between a future of spiraling debt and one where we forfeit our investment in our people and our country. To meet our fiscal challenge, we will need to make reforms. We will all need to make sacrifices. But we do not have to sacrifice the America we believe in. And as long as I'm president, we won't. So today I'm proposing a more balanced approach to achieve $4 trillion in deficit reduction over 12 years. It's an approach that borrows from the recommendations of the Bipartisan Fiscal Commission that I appointed last year, and it builds on the roughly $1 trillion in deficit reduction I already proposed in my 2012 budget. It's an approach that puts every kind of spending on the table, but one that protects the middle class, our promise to seniors, and our investments in the future. The first step in our approach is to keep annual domestic spending low by building on the savings that both parties agreed to last week. That step alone will save us about $750 billion over 12 years. We will make the tough cuts necessary to achieve these savings, including in programs that I care deeply about. But I will not sacrifice the core investments that we need to grow and create jobs. We will invest in medical research. We will invest in clean energy technology. We will invest in new roads and airports and broadband access. We will invest in education. We will invest in job training. We will do what we need to do to compete, and we will win the future. The second step in our approach is to find additional savings in our defense budget. Now, as Commander-in-Chief, I have no greater responsibility than protecting our national security. And I will never accept cuts that compromise our ability to defend our homeland or America's interests around the world. But as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Admiral Mullen, has said, the greatest long-term threat to America's national security is America's debt. So just as we must find more savings in domestic programs, we must do the same in defense. And we can do that while still keeping ourselves safe. Over the last 2 years, Secretary Bob Gates has courageously taken on wasteful spending, saving $400 billion in current and future spending. I believe we can do that again. We need to not only eliminate waste and improve efficiency and effectiveness, but we're going to have to conduct a fundamental review of America's missions, capabilities, and our role in a changing world. I intend to work with Secretary Gates and the Joint Chiefs on this review, and I will make specific decisions about spending after it's complete. The third step in our approach is to further reduce health care spending in our budget. Now here, the difference with the House Republican plan could not be clearer. Their plan essentially lowers the government's health care bills by asking seniors and poor families to pay them instead. Our approach lowers the government's health care bills by reducing the cost of health care itself. Already the reforms we passed in the health care law will reduce our deficit by $1 trillion. My approach would build on these reforms. We will reduce wasteful subsidies and erroneous payments. We will cut spending on prescription drugs by using Medicare's purchasing power to drive greater efficiency and speed generic brands of medicine onto the market. We will work with governors of both parties to demand more efficiency and accountability for Medicaid. We will change the way we pay for health care, not by the procedure or the number of days spent in the hospital, but with new incentives for doctors and hospitals to prevent injuries and improve results. And we will slow the growth of Medicare costs by strengthening an independent commission of doctors, nurses, medical experts, and consumers who will look at all the evidence and recommend the best ways to reduce unnecessary spending while protecting access to the services that seniors need. Now, we believe the reforms we've proposed to strengthen Medicare and Medicaid will enable us to keep these commitments to our citizens while saving us $500 billion by 2023, and an additional $1 trillion in the decade after that. But if we're wrong, and Medicare costs rise faster than we expect, then this approach will give the Independent Commission the authority to make additional savings by further improving Medicare. But let me be absolutely clear. I will preserve these health care programs as a promise we make to each other in this society. I will not allow Medicare to become a voucher program that leaves seniors at the mercy of the insurance industry, with a shrinking benefit to pay for rising costs. I will not tell families with children who have disabilities that they have to fend for themselves. We will reform these programs, but we will not abandon the fundamental commitment this country has kept for generations. That includes, by the way, our commitment to Social Security. While Social Security is not the cause of our deficit, it faces real long-term challenges in a country that's growing older. As I said in the State of the Union, both parties should work together now to strengthen Social Security for future generations. But we have to do it without putting at risk current retirees or the most vulnerable or people with disabilities, without slashing benefits for future generations, and without subjecting Americans' guaranteed retirement income to the whims of the stock market. And it can be done. The fourth step in our approach is to reduce spending in the tax code, so-called tax expenditures. In December, I agreed to extend the tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans because it was the only way I could prevent a tax hike on middle-class Americans. But we cannot afford $1 trillion worth of tax cuts for every millionaire and billionaire in our society. We can't afford it. And I refuse to renew them again. Beyond that, the tax code is also loaded up with spending on things like itemized deductions. And while I agree with the goals of many of these deductions, from home ownership to charitable giving, we can't ignore the fact that they provide millionaires an average tax break of $75,000, but do nothing for the typical middle-class family that doesn't itemize. So my budget calls for limiting itemized deductions for the wealthiest 2% of Americans, a reform that would reduce the deficit by $320 billion over 10 years. But to reduce the deficit, I believe we should go further. And that's why I'm calling on Congress to reform our individual tax code so that it is fair and simple, so that the amount of taxes you pay isn't determined by what kind of accountant you can afford. I believe reform should protect the middle class, promote economic growth, and build on the Fiscal Commission's model of reducing tax expenditures so that there is enough savings to both lower rates and lower the deficit. And as I called for in the State of the Union, we should reform our corporate tax code as well to make our businesses and our economy more competitive. So this is my approach to reduce the deficit by $4 trillion over the next 12 years. It's an approach that achieves about $2 trillion in spending cuts across the budget. It will lower our interest payments on the debt by $1 trillion. It calls for tax reform to cut about $1 trillion in tax expenditures, spending in the tax code. And it achieves these goals while protecting the middle class, protecting our commitment to seniors, and protecting our investments in the future. Now, in the coming years, if the recovery speeds up and our economy grows faster than our current projections, we can make even greater progress than I've pledged here. But just to hold Washington and to hold me accountable and make sure that the debt burden continues to decline, my plan includes a debt fail-safe. If by 2014 our debt is not projected to fall as a share of the economy, if we haven't hit our targets, if Congress has failed to act, then my plan will require us to come together and make up the additional savings with more spending cuts and more spending reductions in the tax code. And that should be an incentive for us to act boldly now, instead of kicking our problems further down the road. So this is our vision for America. This is my vision for America. A vision where we live within our means while still investing in our future. Where everyone makes sacrifices, but no one bears all the burden. Where we provide a basic measure of security for our citizens, and we provide rising opportunity for our children. There will be those who vigorously disagree with my approach. I can guarantee that as well. Some will argue we should not even consider, ever, raising taxes, even if only on the wealthiest Americans. It's just an article of faith to them. I say that at a time when the tax burden on the wealthy is at its lowest level in half a century, the most fortunate among us can afford to pay a little more. I don't need another tax cut. Warren Buffett doesn't need another tax cut. Not if we have to pay for it by making seniors pay more for Medicare, or by cutting kids from Head Start, or by taking away college scholarships that I wouldn't be here without, and that some of you would not be here without. And here's the thing, I believe that most wealthy Americans would agree with me. They want to give back to their country, a country that's done so much for them. It's just Washington hasn't asked them to. Others will say that we shouldn't even talk about cutting spending until the economy is fully recovered. These are mostly folks in my party. I'm sympathetic to this view, which is one of the reasons I supported the payroll tax cuts we passed in December. It's also why we have to use a scalpel and not a machete to reduce the deficit, so that we can keep making the investments that create jobs. But doing nothing on the deficit is just not an option. Our debt has grown so large that we could do real damage to the economy if we don't begin a process now to get our fiscal house in order.
Part of President Obama's speech earlier today at George Washington University on his deficit and debt reduction plan. We'll show that to you in its entirety later this evening at 8 p.m. Eastern, or when the U.S. House goes out. They are voting on one of two amendments by Kathy Castor of Florida on a bill today that would defund or repeal part of the health and education law, the health law that was passed last year.
The yeas are 186, the nays are 238. The amendment is...
Mr. Hinojosa. Off no on aye for Mr. Hinojosa.
On this vote, the yeas are 187, the nays are 237. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment 3, printed in House Report 1-1261 by the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Castor, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. Clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in House Report number 112-61, offered by Ms. Castor of Florida.
Recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device, and this will be a 5-minute vote.
The second amendment here by Kathy Castor of Florida, which would require the Government Accountability Office to conduct a study of the economic impact funds awarded through the Prevention and Public Health Fund that was part of the health care law. The underlying bill would eliminate or repeal the Prevention and Public Health Fund. 5-minute vote on this amendment by Kathy Castor of Florida. A few minutes ago, we were showing you part of the comments today by President Obama at George Washington University on his debt and deficit reduction plan. Well, Paul Ryan, the chairman of the Budget Committee, held a news conference along with other Republican leaders a short while ago in the Capitol and said that the Obama speech today was, quote, dramatically inaccurate. Representative Ryan was there at George Washington while the speech was given, as were other members of the President's Debt Commission. We will show that speech to you again later in our program schedule, following the House, likely at about 8 p.m. Eastern, and that'll be here on C-SPAN. You can also obviously watch it online. And lots more to come in the House tomorrow and Friday on the spending plans for fiscal year 2011 and 2012. Tomorrow, the House and Senate will both take up the 2011 spending bill, funding the federal government through the rest of this fiscal year, through September 30th. And then on Friday, the House will vote on the Republican budget proposal, the 2012 budget resolution, as proposed and passed through the Budget Committee, chaired by Paul Ryan. That will come up on the House floor on Friday.
Have all members voted? Does the member wish to change their votes? On this vote, the ayes
188. The nays are 238. The amendment is not adopted. There being no further amendments, the committee rises.
House will come to order. Mr. Chairman. The Chair of the Committee of the whole House that the committee has had under consideration the bill H.R. 1217 and pursuant to House Resolution 219 reports the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the adoption of the amendment. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to repeal Prevention and Public Health Fund.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I have a motion to recommit it to desk.
House will be in order. House will be in order. The gentleman from Iowa.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I have a motion to recommit it to desk.
Speaker.
Is the gentleman from Ohio...
Mr. Speaker.
Are you gentlemen opposed to the bill?
I am opposed to the bill in its current form.
The gentleman from Ohio qualifies.
Mr. Speaker.
Will report. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Point of order on the motion to recommit.
A point of order is reserved. The clerk will designate.
Mr. Loebsack of Iowa moves to recommit the bill H.R. 1217 to the Committee on Energy and Commerce with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. Strike all after the enacting clause and insert the following. Section 1, preserving Prevention and Public Health Fund for activities for seniors subject to availability of appropriations, A, in general. Section 4002 of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act is amended. 1, and subsection A by striking, it is the purpose, and inserting subject to subsection C, it is the purpose. 2, and subsection B by striking and appropriated, and 3, and subsection C, A by striking shall and inserting may to the extent, and then the amounts made available for use by any Appropriations Act, and B, by striking for prevention, wellness, and public health activities including, and all that follows through the period at the end, and inserting for prevention, wellness, and public health activities for individuals 65 years of age or older. B, rescission of unobligated funds, of the funds appropriated by such Section 4002 before the date of the enactment of this Act. The unobligated balance is rescinded.
House will be in order. Would everyone clear the well, please? Clear the well, please. Gentleman from Iowa is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while I oppose the underlying bill, I am offering this final amendment on a topic that I know is important to all of us, our nation's seniors. Our seniors have worked hard all their lives. Many of them have lived through some of the most trying times in American history, including the Great Depression and 2 world wars. They've also been part of some of our country's proudest achievements and moments, like putting the first man on the moon. Along the way, our seniors have made incredible sacrifices for their families and for their country. My own grandmother helped take care of me while I was young, making sure that my siblings and I had a safe place to live and food on the table.
Gentleman is correct.
Thank you. Thank you.
House is-
That is why our seniors deserve the best care and treatment available as they age. I have visited seniors all across my district in Iowa, delivering Meals on Wheels in Cedar Rapids and Muscatine, serving lunch at Senior Dining in Marion, and hosting events at senior centers and retirement communities like Westgate Towers in Ottumwa and Cedar County Senior Center in Tipton, where this photo was taken.
Will the gentleman suspend? Gentleman may begin again.
One of my proudest moments in Congress, in fact, was when I met with a group of World War II veterans who were here from Iowa on an honor flight tour, and I was privileged to thank them for their service. When I talk to seniors in my district, I hear far too often that many of them are struggling, and this is unacceptable. No senior should retire into poverty or have difficulty paying their medical bills. While we may disagree on the Republican budget, which would end Medicare as we know it, I think we can all agree that we owe seniors access to the preventive health care and public health efforts that the underlying bill would repeal. I am determined to fight for our seniors and to make sure that we keep our promises to them. That is why this final amendment will ensure that the repeal of the Prevention and Public Health Fund will not apply to prevention, wellness, and public health activities for individuals 65 years of age or older. This funding can be used for programs that promote wellness, that empower seniors to take personal responsibility for staying healthy as they age. It can also be used for prevention, including screenings for cancer, heart disease, and Alzheimer's disease. The fund can also be used for public health activities to ensure that seniors have the information they need to make the best possible decisions about their health. These funds can also be used for research, so we can find ways to prevent health problems associated with aging. What's more, by focusing on public health and prevention, this fund can reduce costs in the long run. We all know that early detection improves patient outcomes and saves money. And successful public health campaigns have demonstrated that we can decrease unhealthy behaviors by equipping people with good information. That is why I believe the underlying bill itself is penny-wise but pound-foolish. In the long run, the underlying bill only serves to hurt the nation's seniors. It is unfortunate that some are choosing to make this short-sighted decision when the health of our seniors is at stake. Mr. Speaker, the American people, we should keep in mind, set us here not to fight with each other over critical issues such as the one before us today, but to fight together for them. I urge all members to join me in ensuring that our nation's seniors have access to the preventive health care that will keep them healthy, allowing them to enjoy their friends and families, and remain active in their communities. We owe the seniors in our districts at least that much. The passage of this amendment will not prevent the passage of the underlying bill. If the amendment is adopted, it will be incorporated into the bill, and the bill will be immediately voted upon. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that now is the time to show the American people that we as a body can indeed work effectively for them. And I urge all of my colleagues to vote for this common-sense final amendment. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman from Pennsylvania continue to reserve his point of order?
Madam Speaker, I withdraw the reservation and claim the time in opposition to the motion.
The reservation is withdrawn, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yesterday, we heard the House Minority Leader say that elections shouldn't matter as much as they do. I strongly disagree. Members were brought here to get runaway spending under control. But rather than help us avoid a fiscal crisis, House...
Will the gentleman suspend? The House is not in order. Will members take conversations off the House floor, please? Gentleman may resume.
But rather than help us avoid a fiscal crisis, House Democrats have brought forward an MTR that guts the underlying bill and continues the runaway spending that the American people have rejected. As we have pointed out, Section 4002 gives the Secretary of HHS complete discretion to spend the slush fund with little limitation. Any program within the Public Health Service Act, regardless of its merit or effectiveness, is eligible for funding under Section 4002. Will Section 4002 help train doctors? Or will the money be used to build jungle gyms? Will the Prevention and Public Health Fund be used to advocate for soda tax increases in states? Or build signs that direct people to bike paths? All of these activities can be funded through this slush fund. This MTR underscores the major problem with Section 4002. Rampant spending on the federal credit card cannot continue. The federal government is borrowing 42 cents of every federal dollar spent from this fund. We're facing a $1.6 trillion deficit. The President's irresponsible budget will double the national debt from $14 trillion to $26 trillion. This endless spending is fiscally irresponsible. It's morally bankrupt. Spending today is debt that our children and grandchildren will pay tomorrow. I urge my colleagues to vote no on the MTR, yes on the underlying bill, so that we can get our fiscal house back in order, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the motion to recommit. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say no. No. The noes have it. The motion is not agreed to. The question, gentleman from Iowa.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays.
Does the gentleman ask for a recorded vote?
I do ask for a recorded vote, Madam Speaker.
Recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the Chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of passage.
The House is voting on a motion to recommit on a bill that would repeal the Prevention and Public Health Fund that is part of the health care law of 2010. This is a 15-minute vote. Final passage will follow. Meanwhile, the House earlier today passed the rule for debate for the continuing resolution funding the federal government for the rest of the current fiscal year 2011. That will come up for a vote on the House floor tomorrow. And the House on Friday will take up the Republican 2012 budget resolution. So budget on the minds of members of the House and also in the Senate for the next couple of days. This is President Obama today releases his debt and deficit reduction program in a speech at George Washington University. And we'll show you all of that speech later in our schedule at 8 p.m. Eastern or whenever the House goes out this evening. Meanwhile, after the President spoke, House Republicans accused the President of playing politics with the current debate over long-term debt reduction. They spoke to reporters in the Capitol shortly after the President's speech. We're going to show you, the speakers here include the Budget Committee Chairman Paul Ryan, and we will show you this 20-minute news conference during this first vote.
Good afternoon, everyone. Late yesterday, myself and Chairman Ryan and Chairman Camp were invited to have a front row seat to the President's redo of his budget. He spent approximately a half an hour giving us a history lesson, blaming everyone for the nation's fiscal woes but himself, attacking the Path to Prosperity budget, and setting a new standard for class warfare rhetoric. I don't know about my colleagues, but I thought to myself, and I missed lunch for this. Although I was honored to receive the invitation, it's clearly something I could have watched from my office. This was not a speech designed for America to win the future. This was a speech designed for the President to attempt to win re-election. This was a speech that prioritizes the next election over the next generation. It was a speech that was heavy on aspirational goals and exceedingly light on specific proposals, but those that were present certainly deserve comment. First, at a time when millions of our countrymen remain unemployed, the President, again, proposes tax increases on job creators. If I'd had an opportunity, I would say, Mr. President, how do you expect to help the job seeker by yet again punishing the job creator? I know of no nation that has ever taxed its way into economic prosperity. And Mr. President, again, the deficit is the symptom. It is spending that is the disease. Now, I guess I am at least heartened that the President acknowledges that Medicare is on an unsustainable path. However, putting price controls and rationing on steroids is not the answer. The President passes on Social Security, claiming that it doesn't appear to be any type of immediate fiscal threat. Tell that to all the Americans who are scheduled to receive a 22% automatic benefit cut in the years to come. So again, it's very light on specific proposals. I'll touch upon one more and then yield to my colleagues. The President claims to set up a debt fail-safe, only he fails to include somewhere between 75% and 80% of all federal spending in his fail-safe, which can only lead to either A, completely gutting national defense, or adding implicit huge tax increases on those that are already explicit in his plan. Under the leadership of our Budget Chairman, Paul Ryan, Republicans have a different idea. The Path to Prosperity budget will put America on a fiscally sustainable path to help create jobs, to ensure that our social safety net, which even the President implicitly admits is going broke, is saved for future generations. Our path to prosperity is about saving the American dream for the next generation, ensuring that our children have greater opportunities than we have. Now I'd like to yield to Republican leader Eric Cantor.
Good afternoon. I had an opportunity today to go to the White House with Speaker Boehner and the other leaders in the House and the Senate. And we had a very serious discussion with the President. The request really was for all of us to be very mindful of the challenges that we face and to have an adult conversation to try and come to a resolution. Then what happened after that is the President goes and delivers a speech in which the only concrete proposal that he proposed was raising taxes. And that solution falls far short of dealing with the kind of crisis that we're facing as far as the debt's concerned in this country. As Jeb just said, raising taxes is not what we need right now, 2 days before tax day, especially while we're trying to get job creators back into the game here. You know, we're serious. As you know, we've got the Ryan budget plan on the floor this week. We've laid out our vision in specifics as to how to manage down this debt and to get our economy back on track and to repair the future for our kids. That's what we're about. We're serious. We care about these entitlement programs. That's why we're trying to say you've got to have a safety net for those who need it, but not for those who don't. We have spoken to the specifics, Mr. President. We are serious. Where are you?
I'm very disappointed in the President. I was excited when we got invited to attend his speech today. I thought the President's invitation to Mr. Camp, Mr. Hensling, and myself was an olive branch. Instead, what we got was a speech that was excessively partisan, dramatically inaccurate, and hopelessly inadequate to addressing our country's pressing fiscal challenges. What we heard today was not fiscal leadership from our Commander-in-Chief. What we heard today was a political broadside from our campaigner-in-chief. I guess it's no coincidence that last week when the President launched his billion-dollar re-election campaign was the week we launched our effort to try and get this debt and deficit under control and get our economy growing. Last year, in the absence of a serious budget, the President created a fiscal commission. Then with his budget, He disavowed his fiscal commission. He admitted he ignored all of its recommendations. Now, he wants to delegate leadership yet again to a new commission. How are we to expect different results? And the measurements of success of this new commission are lower than the measurements of success of the last commission that ended a few months ago. We need leadership. We don't need a doubling down on the failed politics of the past. This is very sad and very unfortunate. Rather than building bridges, he's poisoning wells. By failing seriously to confront the most predictable economic crisis in our nation's history, the President's policies are committing us and our children to a diminished future. We are looking for bipartisan solutions, not partisan rhetoric. When the President is ready to get serious about it, we're going to be here working. Exploiting people's emotions of fear, envy, and anxiety is not hope. It's not change. It's partisanship. We don't need partisanship. We don't need demagoguery. We need solutions. And we don't need to keep punting to other people to make tough decisions. If we don't make tough decisions today, our children are going to have to make much, much tougher decisions tomorrow. So I am sincerely disappointed that the President, at a moment when we are putting ideas on the table to try and engage in a thoughtful dialogue to fix this country's economic and fiscal problems, decides to pour on the campaign rhetoric, launch his re-election, and pass partisan broadsides against us, and making it that much harder for the two parties to come together with mutual respect of one another to get things done.
Well, thank you. I agree. Much of the speech was rhetoric that was unnecessary, unhelpful, unproductive. It was far too partisan. I think it is helpful that the President admitted his first budget didn't go far enough, because clearly it didn't. There is one item of individual tax reform that the President has put on the table, which obviously is something I've been advocating, that we need to look at the entire code. But however, the almost $1 trillion in new taxes, particularly the higher taxes on small businesses, which at the rate he's suggesting is about half of the small business income. We need those small businesses paying employees, not paying higher taxes. Higher taxes aren't helpful. So I stand ready to continue to work on these issues, but I think that much of the approach made it harder for us to do that. But I think tax reform is fundamental to getting our economy moving again, getting the kind of job creation we need to help grow, and that will assist in the difficult challenge we have about addressing our debt. Thank you.
I, too, was very discouraged this afternoon when the President gave his response. When he came to talk again about a budget after he had given us a budget just a little over a month ago. And I was excited to think that perhaps we would have an opportunity to have some new and creative ideas. I was excited when I first came here as a freshman to hear the President in his State of the Union speech, knowing that this country is in a debt crisis. But we didn't hear any solutions in that speech, and neither did we hear solutions today. What we heard was political rhetoric. We heard scare tactics, and I'm very disappointed because I think we're all ready, both Democrats and Republicans, to get the country on the right track and get us back to prosperity. I know that during the times that I spend back in the district hearing from my businessmen and individuals, people are scared. They don't need the leaders here scaring them. We need to give them hope. And the Path to Prosperity budget gives them just that. I hope that in the upcoming weeks, as we begin to talk about this budget, that we will have leadership from the President on dealing with this issue in a very positive way and giving people hope, rather than the same old political rhetoric and scare tactics.
Questions?
Yeah, when you talk about this being rhetoric and scare tactics and not serious, it sounds like you're assuming that he's not going to stand by this and that this will change at some point. Do you agree with that?
You know, first of all, I have said the President's not serious because his proposals are a far cry from trying to tackle the tough problems we face. As we said earlier, you know, we've got a detailed, specific plan on the table that we'll be voting on this week. The President's proposal is not a comprehensive fix. It doesn't address the entitlement programs. And the only concrete thing he came out with today was to raise taxes. Again, this is the tired old way of waging class warfare, pitting one piece of society against the other. You know, that's why we say the President's not serious. We are. We are at work here. We're serious. We put forward our proposals, and we'd like to have the President join us in a serious discussion to try and address the problems.
He's going to come off of this. This is just like an open gambit and rhetoric.
Well, again, this is all we've seen. One time, 2 months ago, as was said earlier, in the State of the Union address, there was just lofty rhetoric without any follow-through. This time, now, we're getting into the partisan attacks and the rhetoric with one concrete proposal on the table, which is raising taxes. Again, that's unacceptable. That's not serious.
I would say this is not even a plan. This was a speech. This was a plan to have a bunch of other people set up a commission to come up with a plan, and then to hit spending and deficit targets that are even less ambitious than the last plan he came up with to have a commission to come up with a plan. So this wasn't a plan. This was punting. He punted in his budget. He's now punting to a new commission to come up with smaller savings targets than what he came up with his last commission that he's disavowed.
So, Lane, you say that the President's plan does not deal with Social Security, but Mr. Ryan's plan does not focus on Social Security that much either. What specifically are you proposing that the Republican Party would do to fix Social Security in the next 2 years?
Well, in the Path to Prosperity budget, we force Congress into a solution. We at least acknowledge the problem. Different approaches have been discussed, and I'll let Chairman Ryan speak to his budget. What the President said is it's not a problem. And if it's not a problem, you tacitly accept the status quo, and the status quo is a statutory 22% benefit cut, certainly for my children. That is unacceptable to Republicans. I'll let Chairman Ryan address.
Look, I talked to Janet Hook about this 3 hours ago. Sorry, Janet. I was excited because I thought he was going to give us something on Social Security, a plan. The reason we put our Social Security trigger in our budget is we wanted to be delicate, to make sure that we could get toward a bipartisan solution on Social Security. Look, we have very different opinions on health care. I mean, everybody knows that. We don't believe in government rationing and a government takeover of health care.
The yeas are 189,
so we don't want to go in that direction.
The nays are 234. Okay, on this vote, the yeas are 189, the nays are 234. The amendment is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The no. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. It's a 5-minute vote.
And this is the vote on final passage on a measure that would end a public health fund that is part of the health care law passed last year in Congress. This is a 5-minute vote on the House floor and should be the last recorded vote of today. And it's all about the budget in the next couple of days. The House earlier today approved the rule for debate for tomorrow's bill on the 2011 spending. This is the short-term, the last short-term spending measure, which will, continuing resolution, I should say, which will fund the federal government through the end of the fiscal year, through September 30th of this year. The Senate is also likely to take that up as well. And then the House on Friday will take up the 2012 budget proposal. The Rules Committee is meeting at this hour, as a matter of fact, to talk about the rules for debate on Friday. We're covering that live, and you can follow that on our companion network, C-SPAN 3. Meanwhile, today, President Obama released his debt and deficit reduction plan. We showed you the President's speech earlier today. We will show it again later after the House goes out, as well as the comments by Paul Ryan and others on the Republican side. And both of those speeches and that news conference, I should say, are available on our website at cspan.org. We've also posted on there today's release of the White House deficit and debt reduction plan as released and explained by the President today.
All members voted. Does any member wish to abstain in the vote?
On this vote, the yeas are 236, the nays are 183. The bill is passed without objection. A motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
The chair lays before the House an enrollment.
The chair lays